All right, folks, let's go ahead and get started. Holly, if you want to pull that music down for us, I'd appreciate it. Let's see if we can get David, if you can get Stan unmuted for us while I go through the first part of this uh, call today. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brent Christensen with the Greensboro Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to our daily action call. Welcome to Tuesday, April 7th, 2020. We're glad you're with us today. And first of all, I just wanted to let everybody know you can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram at GSO Chamber. That's at GSO Chamber. At the conclusion of each one of these calls, we summarize them. We put any relevant links into an email. We get all that off to our membership on a daily basis. So you'll be getting a wrap up of this call this afternoon or maybe early this evening. That has, again, a recap and all the relevant links. If you're not a member of the Chamber and you're joining us, welcome. We're glad you're here. You can find that daily wrap up, or you can find all those links on our website. That's greensboro.org/COVID-19. All of these calls have been archived, have been recorded and archived on that site. So you can go back and listen to calls that you may have missed in the past and get all of those links. Starting to see some good news. There are people on these calls that are thankfully listening to us and filling out their surveys, their census surveys online. You should be getting something in the mail very soon. If you haven't already, take the time to fill that out. It's important for us, for our federal representation, and of course funds and everything else that comes from the federal government. A lot of programs based on census information, and so we need to get that back to the federal government as soon as possible. I think I saw our response rate right now is somewhere in the 46% range, which is better than the national average. Not quite as good as we'd like to see at this point, but certainly better than the national average. So we are making things happen, and I think we were in Guilford County the fourth or fifth highest response rate in the state of North Carolina. So again, make sure that you're filling those things out, and we continue to get those census forms filled out. Today we're going to talk about insurance. Everybody's favorite topic. I know it's yours, Stan. We got you on the phone today. And so joining me today is Stan Park. Stan is the agency president of AssuredPartners. He's got a 30-year experience. He's got 30 years of experience in the insurance industry, especially in employee benefits. He's a member of various professional associations, very experienced in the small and medium business market, captives, onboarding platforms. He is a UNC Chapel Hill graduate with a bachelor's in business administration. He's a member of Venture South and of the Nat Green Kiwanis Club, board member of Wellspring Solutions, past board member of the Better Business Bureau, the Make-A-Wish Foundation, the Enrichment Fund for Guilford County Schools, past board for Reading Connections and Young Life. Very involved in our community, very involved in, obviously, in the industry. We wanted to get Stan on board today because we're hearing a lot of questions from our membership about insurance and what's going on in the insurance market right now in these, again, uncharted waters. So Stan, welcome to the call, and thank you for being willing to join us today.
Brent, thank you, and appreciate you all making this forum available to everyone.
Well, we talked about it at the beginning. That's what chambers of commerce do. We are connectors. We connect people with people, businesses with businesses, problems with solutions. Right now, there are a lot of people looking for a lot of different solutions out there, and so that's right up our alley. That's what we do as a Chamber of Commerce. So hopefully we're going to get some folks some good answers today about what they should be thinking about in terms of insurance and that sort of thing. So let's roll into to some of these questions that you and I talked about a little earlier. And then, of course, everybody take a look down on your application board there. There's a chat function there. So if you've got a question, if something that Stan says or something that he doesn't say sparks some interest from you, please feel free to log a comment, ask a question, that sort of thing, and we'll get to folks' questions as we go through this call. So I think the first thing right now, Stan, and we're going to talk a little bit about this more tomorrow in terms of cash flow and managing cash flow. Everybody's concerned about that right now. We've kind of taken this great pause in the economy in the United States and, of course, locally as well. What are the requirements on paying premiums and potential deferrals But what are you seeing out there in terms of our ability as business owners and managers to manage cash and maybe defer some of those payments?
Yes, Brent. I think one of the things we've seen from the insurance companies as a high level and kind of overall statement is a level of generosity and grace that is not normally applied to the insurance companies. And I think what I would want everyone to know is that there seems to be a great deal of flexibility being provided by most every single insurance company that we work with and represent. And at the state level, the Department of Insurance has given guidance due to the emergency status situation that we're under in this state for there to be leniency on those premium payments that people would make. I think it's important for everyone to understand that these are not doing away with the premium payment, so it's simply deferring it. And you know, a little bit of that is kicking the can down the road, but from a cash flow perspective, that may be something someone needs. And what we would encourage you to do is to reach out to your agent or your broker to just confirm what kind of payment plans you can put into place. People pay premiums monthly, quarterly, annually. So there's a lot of different potential outcomes here, Brent. But I think the main thing I would want people to know is that there is flexibility as we speak presently across the board, and then also being driven from the Department of Insurance.
And you're saying that's unprecedented. You haven't seen that kind of leniency in the past.
Not as an overall
Mhm.
you know, you'll see this if we think down to Eastern North Carolina, where they've dealt with some hurricanes in the past. You would see some of these type actions, but they would be very county specific and not something that an insurance company would even proactively take an initiative on.
So one of the things we've seen a lot in these calls, Stan, is people being concerned about their employees, which we love. I mean, that's, you know, the beautiful thing about business in Greensboro is
Sure.
people are working with their employees like their family, and that's absolutely what we want. And so people are concerned about, you know, can I pay premiums for laid off or furloughed employees? You know, what's the situation with COBRA at this point? Help walk us through if a business does have to make the unfortunate decision to lay off or furlough employees. What kinds of things can they do for them in terms of insurance capabilities?
Again, Brent, this is going to be a situation where we're seeing a lot of flexibility and insurance companies coming along as partners to their customers. This would truly be somewhat unprecedented. The general thing that employers need to think about is contractually on their employee benefit plans. And so we're talking about group health insurance, group dental, life insurance, disability, these type of programs that an employer may offer. The key component of that contractually is eligibility. So an eligible employee, generally speaking, is someone who works 30 hours a week on a normal basis. And so what is happening here is that employers are either reducing hours below that 30-hour threshold, or they are simply engaging in a layoff or a furlough. Now, we haven't seen the language furlough often in insurance contracts. It's kind of popped up here in the last month. And I think people are using the term furlough to mean that they are really staying engaged with their employee more so than that kind of traditional term of laid off. What you're finding from most insurance companies is that, and what we're advising clients is kind of over the next 8 to 12 weeks, if you lay off an employee, if your employee's working less than the 30 hours a week, you do have the flexibility to continue to make that insurance contribution, that payment for them. Now, some employers do this in a shared model, even in good times. And so one of the questions that you need to think about as an employer is, how will I collect the 50% or 75%, how I can collect the dependent premiums, that is left up to the employer, and they can invoice employees for this. They can even take PayPal or Venmo, however they want to get that money from the employee. They're able to do that. But I would like for the participants in this call to know that the flexibility is there in that regard. Now, another option that an employer has is, instead of creating this situation where the employee still looks like they're working the 30 hours, is to simply move them into a laid off situation or no longer eligible, which would trigger COBRA. COBRA, or if there are less than 20 employees, North Carolina state continuation. And this allows the employee to stay on the health insurance plan by statute. The employee technically is responsible for paying that premium, but the employer may choose to pay that COBRA premium, and they can waive the 2% COBRA fee that they may normally charge. So the impact to the employer is no different if they're paying that premium there, or assisting paying the COBRA premium, or simply paying the premium in a normal structure. I think the last comment I would add here is that employers just need to be mindful that depending on how long this scenario goes on, at some point this laid off or furloughed status will change, and you need to be very mindful. And I think employers today ought to be planning, how long am I willing to pay for this health insurance before I trigger something else? Because that, if they're in that laid off or furloughed space for 8 to 12 weeks, and then they have to do something further than that, they probably are going to really need to move into canceling their eligibility and triggering COBRA.
Gotcha. Those are great clarifications. I really appreciate that. Here comes the big topic that everybody's interested in, and we've heard an awful lot about business interruption insurance. And so, what are you seeing in terms of business interruption policies? How is it? How does COVID-19 play into that? When are you advising folks to file a claim? Can you kind of walk us through business interruption insurance and the way it's playing out with COVID-19?
Yes. So business interruption insurance is conceptually the idea that if my business has a impairment, a peril that causes me to not be able to function in business. So think about a restaurant that is impacted by an ice storm, and they lose power and are not able to be open for maybe 2 or 3 days. That's a traditional business interruption named peril that would then provide some type of indemnification for the insured. Unfortunately, in the environment that we're in, I'll make a broad statement that probably every participant on this call is not going to have any type of business interruption insurance that applies to a pandemic as a named peril. That's the technical piece that's going on here. So the answer for most everyone is, unfortunately, there is not going to be, at least what we believe to be, a claim for business interruption insurance. Now, Brent, with that being said, one of the things that we would encourage people to do is to go ahead and actually seek out filing a claim for business interruption insurance if you think you have that situation clearly going on. Most likely that claim will be denied, but there is rumblings, there is a little bit of movement potentially at the legislative level to address business interruption. And so what our professional opinion is that if you go ahead today and are indicating that you had a significant business interruption, which clearly many people have, then you've established that, and if the claim is denied, you really haven't lost anything. But if something changes in 3 months, 6 months, a year from now that has a look back provision on it, then you at least have the established position that you, in April of 2020 had some business interruption occur to you. And we think that that would put you in a better position as opposed to 6 months or a year from now trying to go back and kind of recreate the situation of how you might have had business interruption in the event that the laws and regulations change. I would advise everybody to talk to their agent about this and about that strategy. I would also advise everyone to continue to pay close attention to what's going on at the legislative level, because we may see this get tacked on to future policies. And clearly, hopefully we don't, any of us ever go through another pandemic, but I think you'll see that coverage get added. Of course, that will cause premiums to have an increase as well at some point. But it's a very interesting situation. And again, I think I would recommend at least exploring filing a claim, knowing good and well that it probably is not going to be paid, at least today. I hope that makes sense, Brent, from the strategy standpoint.
It does. So go ahead and get on the train and hope that it leaves the station eventually, right? I mean, because if you're not on the train, you're not going to be, when it leaves the station, you're out of luck, right?
Exactly.
So this is a question that you and I talked about a little bit, that nobody wants to face, but what kind of employer liability is there if somebody on our team gets COVID-19? What should we be thinking about in that regard?
So there has been some guidance given, Brent, through some of the resources from the government on really managing a couple of the acts that were passed. We think from an employer liability, you really need to think about what you and what your business is like and how it interacts with customers. Certainly, you need to be asking the question if anyone has, have they tested positive for this, and then potentially do they have any, had they had exposure with a family member of that. If someone has been diagnosed, we think the responsible employer is having that person quarantine themselves with that period for about 14 days. Depending on how much you're in contact with the public, can dictate what you have to or what you choose to do from a notification. Certainly, there are some industries that would have to notify other authorities, and you may be put in a position to have to be shut down. Think about restaurants, medical dental practices, pharmacies, this type of thing would be very, could be impacted from state or local regulators. I think one of the other strategies to think about here, depending on your workflow, is to have A teams and B teams. And y'all may have had this discussed previously, but A teams and B teams allow you to not commingle employees depending on how they're coming in. But if you think A teams and B teams kind of like shifts, at least then if one team is compromised, then you can have the other team that's not compromised come in and continue to keep your business running. And so all that kind of ties into this: how do you manage the potential exposure if an employee or one of their family members comes down with the coronavirus?
That makes a lot of sense. We've got a question here that I don't want to lose before we move forward, and because it goes back to when I didn't see it before we moved on to the next question, but it pertains to business interruption. What is typically needed to file a claim? What kind of documentation, what kinds of information do you need to file a business interruption claim?
Well, Brent, the good thing is you don't have to really do a whole lot to establish the reason for it. I think we're all very much aware. So it's not trying to explain, hey, we had an ice storm in our small geographical area. So the insurance company knows why you're filing the claim, but you want to, again, establish what's been done at the state level and even at our county level as far as the stay-at-home orders. And then I think a good method of this is to have either year-over-year numbers showing revenue impacts, and then you want to get with your current agent or broker to look at what they will typically need. But really, you're just establishing the event that happened, and then establishing the loss of revenue. And then depending on how your policy is written, there may be some expenses that you have to prove that you still incur, because some expenses may not be ongoing expenses. But it's really a revenue previously, and you may just look at the prior month, but as best you can, year-over-year revenue.
So it sounds to me that a lot of the businesses that are putting together this documentation that's needed to file for paycheck protection plan, disaster loans, that sort of thing, it's a very similar type of documentation that might be needed for something like this. So it's not like they're having to go to some additional links in order to file something like this. Does that make sense?
That's exactly right. And I think, Brent, that's another area that, again, we don't know a lot of things at this point until some things get, until some things are kind of quote unquote worked out. But the Paycheck Protection Program, that is a tremendous program that may disallow some of these claims of business interruption, at least during this 8-week period. So I'm still very much an advocate and believe that you should try to access those funds if possible. But really and again, I know that doesn't take care of every single dollar that an employer was missing, but that may disallow a lot of business interruption claims. Now, you could claim that period of, let's just say the month of March, and some businesses were significantly impacted in the month of March where there wasn't anything with the Paycheck Protection Program. So again, a lot to be sorted out here, probably to some degree in the courts. And that's why I'm suggesting go ahead and file your claim. It's going to get denied. Hopefully it doesn't take too much time and effort. But then if the courts for some reason rule differently than we would expect, at least you're in good position then.
Right. You can go back and revisit at that point. That's great.
Right. Yep.
So some things to think about as we kind of wrap up this and hopefully get some more questions. What are some things we need to be thinking about moving forward here? Maybe some short-term and long-term things to think about, Stan, as we move forward through this.
Well, I think you really need to be thinking about, one, hey, did I have a disaster preparedness program in place? This is a disaster. Hopefully, as I said earlier, we don't have another pandemic in our lifetimes, but other disasters will occur. And most of us somewhat feel like we have one, but a lot of times we don't. Insurance companies are very good at helping you develop those. Insurance companies will oftentimes give discounts on pricing or premium, depending on the type of program you have in place. There's actually businesses that are positioned to help as well, especially when we think in the more traditional natural disasters such as hurricanes, tornadoes, these type things. But I think it's clear that bad days do happen. Bad days can be more impactful than any of us ever envisioned. I think another thing to think about is what's happening with the property that you have insured. We have a client right now that has a lot of vehicles, and for a variety of reasons, they're not using their vehicles. And so one of the things that we've done is we've gone back to the insurance company to say, hey, can we lower the exposure risk here, because these vehicles are sitting in they're not on the road. They're sitting in a chain link parking lot, gravel parking lot. Nothing's happening with them. And, there's no riders in them. There's no drivers. And so the insurance company has agreed to reassess those values, lowering those values, lowering that exposure risk, thereby lowering the premium that our client is experiencing. And so that gets back to cash flow. And so not every business is going to have that, but that's a way to validate to the insurance company that you are having a business interruption situation, and to reduce at least the premium. That can be, depending on how big the business is, the impact of that can look differently. I think another really important thing to think about is I'm working from home. Brent, I assume maybe you are. I'm not sure, but many of us are working from home.
I'm sitting at my desk at home right now, watching it rain outside. So yes, very
Yeah,
much so.
I'm hearing it rain. I don't have windows on my third floor, but but I hear it raining. But it's one of the things that's interesting with this work from home is that you really ought to be looking into your workers' comp policy. With working from home, we would encourage employers to tell their employees that they need to have a carved out and a specific place that is the workplace. We're going to see workers' comp claims that occurred in the home. And the question is, when did that happen? Did that happen? Use my example here. I'm on the third floor of my house, kind of in an attic, if you will, bonus room. So if I get hurt in the first floor while I'm fixing lunch, does that count as a workers' comp claim? So it's real important to have carved out areas. It's also important to make sure employees recognize that there are specific work times and that the workday doesn't really run 24/7. That's for their own mental health. But again, this gets back to the liability of, well, if you were working at 9 o'clock on Friday night, which is outside of our normal work hours, maybe that wasn't a workers' comp claim. And there's going to be a lot of issues with that. And also be thinking just about what employees do if they need supplies and things of this nature. Are they allowed to run over to Office Depot or wherever? And what's the impact and thought that goes on there with these basic type things? Again, all this is starting to become reality, but I think working, because we're in this kind of protracted time at home, but people are going to come back and say, hey, I actually kind of got used to working from home. And I think employers will start to open up to that at some levels. You really want to make sure these kind of things are well thought out. Talk about that with your insurance agent and really make sure, if they are working from home, that these are really defined spaces with defined parameters on what is done there. And so that's a really, I think, a comment that was shared with us. And I think it's a really good observation to think about on a go-forward basis.
A good question on the chat right now. The other thing that all this working from home opens up is perhaps some cybersecurity threats. Is it too late to get cybersecurity insurance at this point for incidents that might occur at this point?
Well, Brent, I'm been selling insurance for 30 years, so we never think it's too late for someone to buy insurance. But no, it's not too late to talk to someone. Cybersecurity is usually an additional box to check or additional policy on your program. Mm-hmm. We do think that is something that even without the coronavirus and without the working from home, we think cybersecurity is clearly something that employers need to be strongly considering. But I think it's magnified to the point of the question. I think it's magnified in the environment that we're in. I think there will also probably be, depending on, you need to talk with your IT provider to make sure that the appropriate security aspects are in place when we think about HIPAA protections and things of that nature. Again, working from home, how are we managing content and those type things. So I do think cybersecurity is really important, and really talking with your IT provider or your IT team about having the proper security controls in place for your folks when they work from home. Various ways to do that, making sure they're using company equipment as opposed to personal equipment and that type thing. Right.
Gotcha. One of the things we talked a little bit about, employee assistance programs. This is a scary time for many people, a stressful time for many people. Talk to us about employee assistance programs. How might they be helpful? Where would you find one? That sort of thing. Is that something else we need to be thinking about in this time?
Wow, I think that's a great question, Brent, and it's a great observation to say to think about your staff and to think about the people that work for employers. Employee assistance programs are generally structured to be available on a 24/7 basis, usually a phone call away when people are really struggling with mental health or just having a bad day and trying to make decisions. Maybe they're struggling with financial health. And so what employee assistance programs do is they allow for people to connect with someone to help usually calm them down, move them away from kind of the urgency that someone may feel in a particular situation, and get them to a place of stability, and then to connect with them with a local mental health provider, someone that can give them guidance for the financial situation that they may be facing. EAP programs are tremendously beneficial. And what people will find is that they are embedded into many of the programs that they already have in place. So if you have a disability insurance program, oftentimes it's either embedded in there or can be added to it, often at very little to no cost. You'll see it with group life insurance programs. And then a couple of the health insurance programs have it built into them. I don't want to mention which ones, because it can be dependent on the size of the plan and the particular plan that you have with a particular health insurance company. But I hope everyone on the call will take that time to reach out maybe to their advisor to say, hey, is this something that we have? Because it's usually giving 3, 4, 5 phone calls, visits, if you will, per person per year, which based on all the evidence is more than adequate. But I think an EAP program, that's something that a Fortune 500 company will almost always have. But every single business here in Guilford County, if they wanted to, they can replicate an EAP program for their team as well. And you just never know when that's going to be beneficial, and what a tremendous way to support your team.
That's great. That's great. Stan, what should I have asked you that I haven't asked you about yet? Here's one of the wrap-up questions, and while you're answering that, we'll give some folks some time on our group chat to ask any questions that they might still have after walking through this.
I think those have been really great questions, Brent. Clearly, you all represent the business community and the community overall really well. And I think just simply providing this forum really opens up the ability for people to think and understand what's going on. I do think the Paycheck Protection Program, it includes, and I would make sure people know that they can include health insurance premiums in there. Also just, remind everybody that if they're experiencing cash flow issues and insurance is part of that cash flow problem, to be really proactive. Don't make assumptions right now. I've never experienced kind of the flexibility, if you will, from the insurance community across all the insurers. So there's a tremendous amount of flexibility. I'll give you one example. All the dental, life, disability insurance carriers, they've all pretty much come in line in the last 5 business days, and any plans that are renewing, they're just doing they're holding rates. They're not issuing any rate increases for the next 3 to 4 months, depending on the insurer. But all of them are doing something, and you've never seen that. I've never seen that in 30 years type of action. So yeah, just talk, and if you need something, share that, and you might be surprised at what you get.
And I think we're starting to see that on the personal level too, as well. Stan, you're starting to see that on kind of personal property. More like I've started to see some auto insurance companies start maybe dropping some rates a little bit in this environment.
Yeah, exactly. We're starting to see certainly flexibility there as well, and the one thing that's interesting with those things, they just kind of follow values. So we'll kind of have to watch what home values are and auto values are, and
Right.
the premium assigned that aligns with that.
Very good. Very good. Well, Stan, I don't see any questions. I'm going to say going once, going twice. I'm supposed to wait. I've been told on conference calls these days, you wait 7 seconds. So apparently 7 seconds gives people enough time to either type out a question, come off mute in some cases. We're not letting people come off mute, but at least type in a question. But Stan, I don't see anything. You've done a fantastic job for us this afternoon. We thank you very much for being willing to sit with us in your third floor while I think we got some much needed rain here. But again, thanks for joining us and for your expertise. I will. You won't plug it, but I will. If you go to AssuredPartners.com, there is a section of the Assured Partners website that has COVID-19 resources on it. So you'll want to take a look at that as well. And then Stan, I'm sure they can call your office if they have any specific questions that they didn't want to ask on this call. And hopefully you'll be interested in helping them and answering those questions.
We're happy to help, and I'm glad we could be a participant in this, and hope it gave somebody something to that was beneficial that they didn't know. Thanks again, Brent. Really appreciate it.
We appreciate it. We appreciate it. Okay, so that's gonna wrap that call for today. Let's talk about tomorrow. Tomorrow is Wednesday, April 8th, and we will have Rendell Richards with Scale Finance join us tomorrow. He's going to talk a little bit about the fundamentals, the ABCs, if you will, of cash flow management as we start to look beyond kind of the shock and awe portion of what we've gone through here and start looking at the next 4 to 8 weeks. What should we be thinking about in terms of business owners and managers in terms of cash flow and that sort of thing. And so Rendell will be giving a presentation and then taking questions tomorrow. So it'll be a good hands-on lesson for our small business owners and managers. It's what we're here for. So until then, we'll hopefully do your very best to stay home, stay safe, stay well. And we'll talk to everybody again tomorrow at 3 o'clock when Rendell Richards joins us from Scale Finance. Everybody stay safe and well. We'll talk to everybody again tomorrow at 3. Thanks again, Stan.
Thank you. Goodbye.